Hello students, welcome to my class. This is Professor Vincent Osaya and this is the presentation of part 4 of chapter 8, audit sampling. We talk about planning for the audit sampling, and we also talk about the issues relating to the planning aspect of performing audit sampling. Now we are going to talk about the performance. We said that the first issue is every item in the population has the same probability of being selected as every other sampling unit in the population. In other words, every item in the population should have an equal probability of being selected as part of the sample. Number 2, performance. The auditor determines the sampling interval by dividing the population by the sample size. In other words, if we are planning to select only 100 items of thousands and thousands of items in the population, then we divide the entire population by 1,000 in order for us to know the every nth item to be selected as part of our sample. Then moving along, perform the audit procedure. So for example, here we have a sales invoice should not be we said that we are testing the control to see whether the sales invoice should not be prepared unless there is a related shipping document. Now, so what are we looking for here? So we are looking for a situation whereby the shipping, the invoice cannot be prepared unless the related shipping documents are in place. So we are looking for evidence to make us to believe that that control is actually working or if it is not. And in other words, we are looking at how much deviation we have in the control. Now, still talking about performing the audit procedure, we said that unless the auditor finds something unusual about either of these items, they should be replaced by a new sample item. So what are we talking about here? During the process of going through the items, if you see examining the sample, if you see a voided document or unused or inapplicable document, we said that that particular item should be replaced with a new sample item. Now, moving along, we said that if the auditor is unable to determine or to examine a document or to use an alternate procedure to test the control, the sample item is a deviation for the purpose of evaluating the sample result. So that is self-explanatory. Now, let's take a look at a situation here whereby the auditor detected several deviations during the initial stage of testing the sample as to whether the control is working or not. In that situation, the auditor can just might as well forget about examining additional items in the sample and come to the conclusion that the control is actually not working. So that is basically it in connection with performance. Let's take a look at evaluation. So after completing the audit procedure, the auditor summarizes the deviation for each control tested and evaluate the result. Now, let's take a look at the example they have here. So if we have 2 deviations in a sample of 50, you divide 2 by 50, that will give you 4%. So we also talked about the upper deviation rate here. And we said that the upper deviation rate is the sum of the sample deviation rate and an appropriate allowance for sampling risk. What does that mean? We are going to talk about that in the next slide. Let's take a look at the application of that. So the part of the matter is when the auditor come up with when the auditor compares the tolerable deviation rate to the upper to the computed upper deviation rate, we said that the upper deviation rate consists of the tolerable deviation rate plus an appropriate allowance for sampling risk. So let me repeat that again. The upper deviation rate consists of the tolerable deviation rate. We already talked about the definition of tolerable deviation rate, plus an appropriate allowance for sampling risk. So what does that mean? So the upper deviation rate actually represents how high the population deviation rate might be. So if you take a look at the previous slide, we already determined the deviation rate based on this sample. We said that 2 divided by, there were 2 deviations and the sample size was 50. Divide 2 by 50, we come up with 4%. So that is the deviation rate. Now, in order for the auditor to know how bad the situation could possibly be in terms of deviation, we also compute the upper deviation rate, like I said, which consists of the tolerable deviation rate plus an appropriate allowance for sampling risk. So that is the conclusion of chapter 8, by default chapter 9 as well, in terms of audit sampling.